on. Davis has it. Touchdown! Carolina wins! Carolina is the Coastal Division champion! Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go, man there! Touchdown! Touchdown, Carolina! The pistol, Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson, he tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted! Surratt intercepts it! Holy cow, Carolina's gonna win! And off to Javonte Williams again, pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back, pressure coming, Aguilar floats it up, incomplete! No flags! Head on back up the mountain! Carolina wins it in double overtime! Loftus out of the shotgun, throws to the end zone, incomplete! Incomplete! The bell belongs to us! Carolina wins it 47-45 in double overtime!
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio, he's gonna take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Anthony Pagnotta, Josh Marlowe here with you on a Friday night as we get prepared for the third game of the Tar Heel football season, as Carolina gets ready to host the NC Central Eagles for the first time in program history. It's not, a game that I think a lot of people are really going into apprehensive, but there's still a lot of things that we're going to bring you here tonight, including, believe it or not, keys to a victory for Carolina. Most importantly, though, we're going to let you know about the team that's going to be on the other side. We're going to tell you the biggest Tar Heel storylines heading into this game. And, of course, we will give you our predictions at the end of the game, as we always do. Carolina looking for their third straight, 3-0 start to begin a season. And I think this is the position that we were hoping that Carolina would be in. It was all about that first game. Could Carolina get off to a hot start? Because you knew that this schedule was going to allow Carolina to get into some sort of rhythm, or you at least hoped that it would. Based off of what we saw last week, what do we think about Carolina heading into this matchup with NC Central? Because I think, a lot of people were questioning after week one, especially on the offensive side of the ball, if Carolina was, going into this stretch where they wanted to be. And I think, you look at the quarterback spot, I think people were concerned about that heading into last week. I think we got some answers, but I think this game, and in particular, more than just about any of the other ones, this is a game that if a certain group needs to get right, this is that game for Carolina. And I think that should be the approach that the Tar Heels are taking going into this game against the Eagles tomorrow.
Yeah, this is a chance for you to really get in more rhythm, clean up some things on both ends, figure out who you are as a football team. But the most important thing is A, get the win, and B, come out healthy. This is a good program that's coming in from the FCS level, but this game should be over early on in the second half. And so, we liked where this game was on the schedule because we identified from the beginning that if Carolina won their first game, they had a lot of winnable games in a row. This is another one of those. But once the injury to Max Johnson came down, we knew it was going to be important for Carolina to figure out who they were as an offense with Connor Harrell. They took a step in the right direction last week against Charlotte. This week, you hope to build off of that because this is an opponent you should have the easiest time moving the football up and down the field against so far this season.
Yeah, I mean, look, here's the thing. You mentioned that NC Central is a team that Carolina should be able to handle. And yes, that certainly is the case because look, last 2 years heading into this season, tremendous for Trey Oliver. He's done a great job there. They were 19-5 in the last 2 years entering this season. This year so far, they are 1-1, and they picked up a huge win in the season opener against Alabama State, which a lot of people believe set the stage for them to be viewed as the best HBCU school this year. Probably means that there's a chance they could end up back in the Celebration Bowl, but there's also people that believe that this team could be back in the FCS playoffs where they were last year. But those thoughts took a hit last week when they go on the road and get blasted by Elon 41-19. That was a team that they did lose to last year, but it was much, much closer. And for this group, there's a lot of things that are different. They lost a lot of pieces from the last few years. You look at their offense, 25 points per game so far this season in the first 2 games, just 303 yards of total offense, 150 through the air, 153 on the ground so far. And you look at their quarterback, Walker Harris, this is really where the struggles have been at. He is a first-time starter this year, and so far he's thrown for 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions in the first 2 games of the season. So he's having trouble moving the football down the field, and then he's having issues with turnovers, which against normal FCS competition would be concerning. Against an FBS opponent and a Power 4 opponent at that in Carolina, I think that'll probably have the Eagles pretty fearful going into this game about what could happen. If they're going to have any sort of success, it's probably going to be on the ground with their running back, Jamari Taylor, a guy that comes from the Charlotte area, played at West Meck High School, and is a veteran. He's been there for a long time. He's off to a good start this year, 188 yards. 3 touchdowns in those first 2 games. The other guy to keep an eye on the offensive side of the ball is Joaquin Davis, a deep threat who's got 7 catches, 164 yards, and a touchdown so far this season. That's the type of receiver that gave Carolina fits last week when they faced Charlotte and Jarius Mack. So the Tar Heels going to have to adjust to that. And then you look at their offensive line, it's a unit that has been hit and miss. First game out of the gate looked really good against Alabama State. But in the second game, they had their struggles, and this is a unit that has already allowed 5 sacks so far this year. It makes a lot of sense, though, because this is a group that starts 3 underclassmen after losing some guys last season. So when you look at this offense for NC Central, it feels like this is the type of offense that Carolina's defense should be able to get right against, mainly that secondary unit, against a group of wide receivers that outside of Joaquin Davis have really produced nothing. Not a single receiver has more than 30 receiving yards so far in the first 2 games of the season.
Yeah, I think you'll see closer to what you saw from Carolina in week 1 from a production standpoint in terms of the yards that they allowed, as opposed to what you saw last week. I know you were very concerned about what you saw defensively. There were other teams that struggled defensively last week as well that are better than Carolina. And so, we know we don't have Kamen Rucker. You got a full week to prepare for that, to adjust on having your best pass rusher on the field. I still think you'll see a rather conservative game plan from Jeff Collins. I don't think you'll see him put a lot of on tape in this game. This is a game where, honestly, you should be able to rely on your talent and your depth to win out over what the opponent has. Kind of what you see in basketball, where you'd always hear Roy Williams say we were more talented, more gifted. That's why we were able to do all these things better. That should be the case for Carolina. Their defensive line should be able to impose their will. These receivers aren't as big as, they're not as fast, they're not as strong, they're not as physical as what they've seen the first 2 weeks. So I think you'll see Carolina, from a production standpoint, kind of hold North Carolina Central what you held Minnesota to in week 1, and we'll feel pretty good about where this defense is after 3 games on Saturday night.
Yeah, I would hope that's where you're sitting at heading out of this game. But the thing is that last week it was concerning because this was a passing offense in the first week of the season that really struggled for Charlotte, and Carolina's secondary had their issues. We'll get back to them a little bit more when we talk about the Tar Heels headlines heading into this game. But when you go over to the defensive side of the ball for NC Central, it's a group that is off to a rough start. Especially when it comes to defending the run. That's been their biggest struggle out of the gate so far this season. And it makes a little bit of sense because the strength of this unit is on the back end, but this is a team that's allowing 202.5 rushing yards per game so far this season. Now, passing-wise, just 162.5, which isn't bad, but isn't great, especially considering that Elon tore him up a little bit last week. The biggest thing for them, they're allowing 32.5 points per game. So Carolina should be able to score and score often against this defense. But yeah, as I said, the strength of this unit is their safeties more than anything. I mean, their defensive backfield as a whole is pretty strong. But when you've got a safety tandem like Cole Jones and Malcolm Reed, they're guys that they are pretty confident in and guys who have shown up both in coverage and in the run game so far this year. Jalen Bowden is on the outside, a corner who's also off to a pretty strong start. And then you've got linebacker Ja'Kai Brevard, who has been a steady force in there so far for them in the first two games. That's really where everything sort of ends. I mean, they do have some guys on the defensive front that have done some good things when it's come to creating tackles for loss and sacks. But again, very much like their offensive line, it's very hit or miss. This is a group that has 18 tackles for loss so far this season and 6 sacks, but it's a group that has been torn up, especially in the run game. So I think that's where Carolina should be able to take advantage of them in this game. And you would hope that, against a unit like this, regardless of who Carolina has in the game, this is one of the reasons I really hope that we get to see Darwin Barlow in this game. This is where you get your rushing game really in rhythm. I think this is a game where you determine how much you want to use Connor Harrell in the running game. If you want to use him a little bit more, then this is the game where you can run him, 12, 13 times because you can use a lot of that early in the game. I think that's going to be the game plan for Carolina going in, is put the ball on the ground often against the Eagles and make them stop it.
Yeah, I mean, your goal should be to wear them down. This is a defense that's given up over 200 rushing yards through the first few games of the year, and you've got the best talent that they've seen so far, and so you have some injuries up front as well. So you're still trying to work out, get that chemistry refined. Try to still build some depth among that offensive line. That's what this game offers. And so make no mistake, that should be the game plan. A, to shorten the game to keep your defense as rested as possible. But B, this is a weakness of your opponent. Then it's a strength of yours. So you should try to exploit that, play to your strengths. Get Davian Gauss more reps. Use Darwin Barlow if he's back healthy this week. Get Caleb Putt involved. Get everyone involved. Because there's no excuse. You should be able to run the ball at will against this team as the game moves along. And so I expect to see Carolina run the ball 40-plus times in this game tomorrow night because if they do that, they'll be able to wear down North Carolina Central and really get this running game in a really good spot going into that game next week against James Madison.
Well, when you look at the special teams unit, you've got one guy that handles all of the kicking duties. That's Juan Velarde. He is their place kicker, is their punter as well. A little more successful as a punter as opposed to him as a place kicker, and also handles their kickoffs as well. So you'll see and hear that name a lot tomorrow night. Meanwhile, in the return games, two guys that have had success so far this year with Darrell Taylor and Chris Mosley. The interesting thing is Mosley not listed on their depth chart as their starting kick returner, but both of those guys are certainly returners that Carolina has to be aware of, especially with the coverage units as concerning as they were a year ago. I will say, so far this season, Carolina off to a much better start in that area in special teams, really just across the board, but especially when it comes to covering kicks and punts. You move over to the Tar Heel side of things, and I think the biggest thing that has to be talked about going into this game is this secondary, because last week was simply unacceptable. When you give up 309 passing yards, the most to a Charlotte team since October 1st of 2022, and give up big plays. It was 8 of 20 or more yards. This unit needed to look themselves in the face. And to me, it's primarily two guys. I know the safeties have not been great rotating over the top. I think them as a whole, it's just that's a group that so far this year has really disappointed, because week 1, it was the issues with tackling. And then week 2, it became evident that they were getting beat down the field. I mean, you had 3 different safeties that gave up catches of more than 20 yards. So that group as a whole has to be better. But when you look at the corners, these are guys that are expected to be able to handle themselves in coverage no matter what. And what we've seen from Marcus Allen has been unacceptable so far this year. Yeah, he's had moments where he's made plays on the football, but it still feels like he is way too hit or miss out of the gate. And the same can be said for Caleb Cost, who, look, if he struggles against this receiving core, especially because he is not going to be matched up on the outside with Joaquin Davis, he'll be matched up with someone that coming into this game really hasn't done anything to start the season. I think then you really have to start having a conversation about seeing other guys out there on the field. But this group, it's on Charlton Warren, it's on the rest of the coaching staff to get this group ready to go for this game, and for them to make a statement and get themselves back into rhythm, especially after they were the ones being bragged about the most on this defense heading into the season.
Yeah, I think you still got to remember this is still a new defense, and they're learning how to play in Jeff Collins' scheme. And you go back to week 1 and the way that they looked. Part of that was just the way that game just kind of turned into both teams were basically trying to run the ball to see who could find a way to win the game, because both passing games were down in that. Last week, I know they gave up 7 plays of over 25 yards or more.
Hey.
Which is concerning. I think the first thing you got to do is credit the opponent. Charlotte, whether it was scheme or just out there making plays, like they executed the way that they wanted to. I do think Carolina not having Kamen Rucker last week played a factor in the inability to rush the passer. That's going to be the case this week. I think the thing you want to see more than anything is just better communication, and then just doing a better job finishing plays. That's probably been the one thing Carolina has struggled to do, where they've had some rather basic miscommunication issues the first 2 weeks, and then they've had their fair share of issues not finishing plays. They're in position to make plays, they just haven't made them. And so, unless the secondary comes out and holds them to like 50 yards passing, and they intercept 4 passes, they're really not going to do anything that's going to invoke a whole lot more confidence in you if you're already saying what you've said through the first 2 weeks has been rather unacceptable. But what you want to do is be in a better position going in to that James Madison game as you get closer and closer to conference play, knowing that this group isn't going to be a weakness once you get into ACC play.
I mean, the biggest thing for me was that you said Kamen Rucker not being out there was the reason they couldn't get pass rush. Yeah, part of that was because he wasn't out there. The bigger issue was that you saw it early in the game. Carolina was aggressive. Carolina was blitzing. But as the game went along, you simply couldn't, because your secondary cannot hold its own. And miscommunication, I mean, yeah, to a certain extent, again, with the safeties, I think that's the biggest issue. When it comes to the corners, it's just that guys are not covering. It's just that guys are getting beat when they're in one-on-one coverage. That's been the biggest issue for Caleb Cost. And when we saw him last year in the bowl game, that wasn't an issue for him. But I don't know if it's just because he was playing baseball and wasn't with the team back in the spring. It took him a little while to get resettled back in. when they got into fall camp. I mean, he was still being bragged about, but for some reason, you're not seeing what you need to see from these guys. Last week, you should not have given up that many passing yards to an offense that the week before couldn't throw the ball down the field to save their life. It was a stagnant offense. So the fact that you allowed that team to have as much success as you did, again, I mean, your defense is better talent-wise than what James Madison brought to the table. That's where this group just has to find a way to improve, because if not, you do need to start rotating other guys in. If this NC Central team with a quarterback that comes in throwing for 150 yards a game, if he is able to pick apart this secondary at times, if there's more blown coverages, then you have to start looking at other guys, because this cannot be the crutch that this team that people can take this team out on. I mean, this cannot be a weakness that gets exploited week in and week out in the ACC, because if you allow explosive plays like that down the field, that's great that your run defense is one of the best in the country. It isn't going to matter. No one's going to run the ball against you. They'll just stand back there and throw it 50 times, because they know at some point these guys are going to give up big plays down the field. So I think it's very important for this group to bounce back. I don't think they need to do what you said, 50 yards or something. But to me, just don't blow these coverages. Don't leave guys wide open where we are left scratching our heads saying, how does this keep happening over and over again like we saw a week ago? Now you move over to the offensive side. Man, Connor Harrell's the biggest storyline here. And I think you need to see him start to settle into a rhythm. So first start of the season last week against Charlotte, it was solid. He missed some throws. The hope is that this week you can see him take another step forward. Maybe he doesn't miss as many of those throws. Maybe, you start to see him get more involved in the run game. I think right now with Harrell, the biggest thing that you want to see is him sort of building week to week off of what he does. And this is a team that I think if he's going to gain confidence in himself. Last week probably helped him a little bit, but this is the big week where I feel like he can put together the type of performance that gives him the confidence to be ready for when Carolina jumps into conference play.
Yeah, what you want to do in this game is find another set of plays, formations, whatever it is, that your quarterback feels comfortable and confident in. Mack Brown said after the game they got to do a much better job utilizing his legs as a runner, but also as a thrower. Using bootlegs, naked bootlegs to get him moving on the run as opposed to making him stand back there in the pocket and deliver the football. Expect that to be incorporated into the game plan this week. And so, for him, the arm talent is there. It's not a lack of arm strength. It's becoming a lot more accurate. And hopefully you see him take a step in that right direction this week. But what you want to do is just continue to settle him in and continue to find out what he likes, what he doesn't like, put him in RPO situations, put that pressure on the defense to account for his legs, because I think his decision-making has been very good in those situations. He's known when to throw it. He's known when to give it. And with the way that Carolina is putting, all these different tags on these plays, there's almost three different options at one time. It puts a lot of stress on a defense, and it can really make this offense a lot more explosive as the season moves along. And so I think tomorrow you'll see the best game you've seen for Connor Harrell, which, won't say a lot because of the opponent, but what it does for his confidence is the most important thing, because you're getting to the point now, starting next week with James Madison, which is a quality, a group of 5 opponent. And then after that, it's in the conference play. He needs to be confident every time he steps on the football field in his abilities, because, that's a big part of this game is confidence. You've had a confident quarterback the last 5 years. That's why Carolina has been in the position they've been over the last handful of seasons. And so if he plays well this game, it takes another step for him in the right direction. And then, you really feel a lot better about him moving forward in a wide open ACC, that he can be a guy that could lead Carolina maybe to a spot in the ACC title game.
All right. And then, one of the big things for him, I think his receivers can help him out, because last week, I mean, they were all right, but you didn't see the type of separation that I think you really need to see. There just hasn't been that guy that has really stepped up. And I think that's the thing that you're looking for here in this game and next week's game against James Madison, is who really establishes themselves as go-to receivers. I think J.J. Jones in week 1 showed you that he's capable of doing that. Last week, didn't really see Connor go his way much. But I think the thing is that we saw back in the bowl game last year, that was one of the guys that Connor was comfortable going to. Now, outside of him, I don't really know anybody else. He didn't work with Kobe Paysour even last year. And so far this year, Paysour off to a slow start. Nate McCullum, I mean, he had 1 touch last week. It was a touchdown, but he didn't have a single catch, wasn't even targeted in the game, as he continues to struggle to create any sort of separation. And even Christian Hamilton, he gets open down the field, makes his first career catch, second catch of the season, rather, and first career touchdown reception was where I was going with that. But the thing is, it happens on a trick play where he gets open because of the play design. So I think for this group, it's really important for guys to start separating in this room, because you need at least 2, maybe even 3 guys that are playing at a pretty high level and that your quarterback can trust when you go into conference play, especially with the fact that right now you're dealing with an injury to the guy that he probably looks at as his favorite target based off of what we saw last week in tight end Bryson Nesbitt.
Yeah, I also think last week, with the way Carolina ran the football, that was their primary focus, and you were able to get a young running back a lot of touches, and so I don't think Carolina felt the need to really work on their passing game in the game. You can talk about, you got Hamilton open with the trick play, but I do think this offense is going to use a lot more of that type of stuff to generate big plays. And so as long as you convert on them, then there's really nothing wrong with that. I think, with Bryson Nesbitt getting hurt also, I thought that played a factor as well, because I think if he's on the field, he's a guy that, Connor Harrell looks to more often. And so I think this passing game is going to grow as Connor Harrell grows. This is something that it's going to be a week by week, game by game basis. And so what you want to see in this game is progress, and progress isn't always linear. And so it'll be interesting to see how they use these guys. The talent is there. Chip Lindsey, I think, could do maybe a much better job of scheming these guys open, but this probably isn't a game where he's going to have to do that either. And so it's really making the most of your opportunities, because if we're being honest, you probably only need to see the ball in the air 15 to 20 times. And so you got to make the most of those opportunities. And so I think probably more so than anything, they're really working on getting this passing game much more refined in practice, because this is a game this week you shouldn't have to throw the ball a whole lot to really show progress in that area. You probably look more towards James Madison as that next game, where we're looking to see a wide receiver or 2 step up and produce in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I feel like you really want to have that when you go into that matchup, because as you said, they're a weird team. I have no idea what to believe James Madison actually is. The team that you played last week, Charlotte, they smashed them 30-7, but then turned around and almost got beat by an FCS opponent in Gardner Webb. So I feel like you want to have Connor comfortable with a certain amount of wide receivers going into that game. My thing, the most frustrating part for me, is really just the slot receivers, because Nate McCullum hasn't done anything since last year when they played against Minnesota. I mean, the touchdown that we saw him score the other day, that was his first touchdown in a game since that Minnesota game last year. And he disappeared. We know he disappeared down the stretch of last season when Kobe Paysour got hurt. For Paysour, I mean, I'd love to see him be back to the guy that he was the first 6 games. I think that was the stat, led the team in receiving the first 6 games that he played in. But the problem is that his feet, we just don't know how healthy they actually are. When you break both your feet within a 3-month span, it's hard to really demand that you show up and the next season be back to 100%. But I feel like someone's got to emerge there, because right now you're trying to get the ball as consistently as you can to J.J. Jones. But when teams are able to take him away on the outside, especially if they have a strong number 1 corner, who is that other guy that is stepping up? I thought Chris Culliver, we would see more of him, but you're seeing a lot of Christian Hamilton in terms of the snaps. So I feel like it's on the slot receiver. Somebody has to step up, and this is the type of game where you can do that. This is not a group that should be able to handle you in the slot. This is, a game you should be able to go to work. So let's see what these guys got. It's time to step up and someone take charge, because they're going to need you, especially if Bryson Nesbitt doesn't play. And that kind of transitions us into the next storyline, and that's the injuries. Because I got to be honest, in this game, you should not play Bryson Nesbitt unless you absolutely have to. I get wanting to keep guys in a rhythm, but this is a guy that's had injury issues each of the last 2 years. You don't want him to get even more banged up with whatever upper body injury he suffered last week, this week, and you'd rather save him for a game like next week against a wild card FBS opponent, and then eventually when you get into conference play. Same thing with Omarion Hampton. Yeah, I'd like to see him out there to start the game to at least show that he's healthy. I think he is. I think it was probably just something that he felt. It could have even been a cramp somewhere in the lower body, and they just said, you know what, forget about it. We're not even taking the risk. But, yeah, I want to see how they manage those guys. Same thing on the offensive line. That's the unit that I'm probably most concerned about when it comes to the injuries. But, for me, Aiden Banfield, I think it's different for him. You want to see him continue to grow because he is a true freshman. The more reps on the field, the better he's going to get. So for him, I think even dealing with whatever injury he is, which I believe it's an ankle. That's what Mack Brown said he was dealing with in the opener and just played through it. And I think that right ankle got stepped on last week, may have re-aggravated something at that moment, but he was able to fight through it again. I'd like to see him out there gaining those valuable reps. But Austin Blaschke, who is questionable for this game, to me, there's no reason to even play him. Let's see what Zach Greenberg has and, just try to make it out of this game relatively healthy for what will be a much more important stretch coming up starting next week.
Yeah, welcome to the load management era of college football. This is something you see all the time in the NBA. You see it now in Major League Baseball. In the new 12-team playoff world of college football, you're going to see it in this sport as well. Simply put, Carolina should not play Omarion Hampton. They should not play Bryson Nesbitt. They should not play anyone that is not 100% or as close to 100% going in this game, because simply put, it's not worth it. If you're playing Hampton, you're probably playing him to make up for some numbers he lost last week.
Yep.
And kind of have him to be in the conversation as being the best, from a stats perspective, the best running back in the country. And so this is why Mack Brown has stressed the importance of building depth. They've done a much better job of that. This is as deep as they've been since he's gotten back. But, you've had some injuries pop up in the regular season. Now you're able to continue to further build that depth. And so this could be something that, we're looking up in October and November as a blessing in disguise, because you're taking some valuable hits off of the body of Omarion Hampton, maybe off the body of Bryson Nesbitt, 2 guys that are going to be highly involved in the offense every single week. But also what you could be finding is the future faces of your offense starting next season. And so it'll be interesting to see how Carolina handles these injuries, because I do think, there is some gamesmanship that goes into it. And if you're deliberately holding people out, your opponent would maybe take that as a sign of disrespect. But, if Carolina doesn't play these guys, it should not be a consequence in terms of the outcome. They should be able to win this game still going away. If those guys are not as close to 100% as possible, I'd much rather see them on the sidelines in street clothes as opposed to going into the medical tent for an injury during the game.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, I'd go up to Trey Oliver before the game and say, look, man, if you think that we're holding these guys out as a slight to you, we're not. These guys are just so valuable to us that we feel like we have to put them on the bench. Like I said, you've seen guys that have had repeated injuries. And then, I mean, when it comes to Hampton, that's your most important player. You lose him for any period of time, this team is done. There is no chance this team can succeed offensively without him. I get it. Davian Gauss showed some really good things a week ago. It could be different when you get into conference play. You need a guy like Hampton who has been through conference play, who knows that, you know, he can run through some of the defenses that he's going to see again this year. You need a guy that is Heisman candidate worthy back there in the backfield to carry a team that, we just don't really know what Connor Harrell is going to be able to do in the passing game when they get into conference play. And then with Nesbitt, I mean, again, it's like I said, he's been hurt each of the last 2 years with pretty significant injuries. Now, he played through the ones at the end of last year, but he gets injured every single year. So the fact that he is dealing with something this early in the season, when you have a chance to rest him and allow him to potentially get healthier, I think you've got to do that. And then the other thing, when you look at what this ends up doing, if Carolina holds these guys out, it creates better depth. The offensive line is the perfect example of this. Last week, Zach Greenberg, who we had not seen before that time, he was a guy that we heard when he came in, he's versatile. He could play guard or he can play center, but we hadn't seen him rotated in there so far to begin the season. He gets thrown out there 4 plays into the game and takes over and does a really good job. And all of a sudden you look, and maybe even the staff looks and says, we have a pretty valuable guy here. When Austin Blaschke does return, he's a guy that, because of how well he run blocked and pass protected a week ago, they could throw him out there at left guard and say, hey, let's see if you can be better than a guy like Malik McGowan, who's come off the bench and has struggled a little bit in terms of his run blocking. So I think that's the potential benefit, because we saw it also at running back a week ago with Davian Gauss getting those carries. I think it could help at tight end. Not necessarily tight end. I think more with just the pass catching group as a whole, because as we said, we want to see some separation there. Well, guys have to step up. You're missing a key piece, a key receiving target, where now Connor Harrell needs somebody to rely on in this game besides just looking J.J. Jones' direction. Who else is going to step up if we don't have Bryson Nesbitt out there? So I think it's going to help in a variety of different ways going into this game. The last big storyline for the Tar Heels heading into this game is what this defensive front six is doing so far. And I hope that they can keep rolling in this game, because this is an offense so far for NC Central that their strength has been running the football. That's been Carolina's defensive strength, though, to start the season. And with the talent advantage, with an extremely young offensive line that NC Central is bringing, you would hope that Carolina's defensive front is able to continue their dominance up front. And, it starts with the guys that we challenged in the offseason to step up, Jabari Ritzie and Travis Shaw. And so far, both of those guys have done that. They have to do it once again in this matchup against NC Central.
And Mack Brown's talked all year long about playing to a standard, not looking at the opponent, just focusing on Carolina and executing what they want to execute. If Carolina does that, this defensive line will put together another performance, because they're more gifted, they're more talented, they're physically got the advantage. They'll be able to wear down this offensive line. They'll be able to make plays, live in the backfield, and do all the things they've done a really good job the first 2 weeks against the run. And so I think this game for the defensive line, this is like a maturity game. This is like okay, after 2 weeks, are you resting on your laurels, or are you going to go out there, strap up put your jock strap on and go kick someone's ass for a third straight week? And so I think that's the thing about Jeff Collins is Carolina finally has a defensive coordinator who is never going to let his guys settle. He's never going to let their guys let up. He's never going to let them be content with what they've done. And so I think you'll see that on display on Saturday. I think Jahvaree Ritzie will continue his hot start. I think Travis Shaw will continue to impact the game the way he has. Same thing with Joshua Harris. And hopefully Des Evans gets rewarded for what he's been doing, because the stats won't blow you away, but he's made a lot of initial plays that have led to Carolina either getting a TFL, recording a sack, maybe causing an incompletion or whatever. So hopefully if this defensive line brings the attitude, the intensity, the sense of urgency they brought the first 2 weeks, they could be in store to have the best game so far of the 2024 season.
Yeah, also a good chance to learn a lot more about the redshirt freshman that Carolina has out of that rush end position, because with no Kamen Rucker, and they're probably not going to have him next week, let's see if Tyler Thompson and Jabron Harvey are capable of stepping up and playing a significant enough role off the edge for Carolina, because they're going to need him next week against James Madison to be able to get after the quarterback. But yeah, I don't see any way that this group doesn't come out motivated. Jahvaree Ritzie was on the Carolina Insider Pod and just said it point blank that there's a different attitude around this team with Jeff Collins and Ted Monachino in the positions that they're in. Last year, you saw a position coach in Tim Cross who was just struggling and had been for the last few years in terms of developing talent. And you had a defensive coordinator in Gene Chizik that you honestly had to question how much of his heart was actually in what he was doing. To me, there's zero questions about where Jeff Collins is at. He wants to be here. He knows that this is his opportunity in college football that he wasn't able to have last year, and that he thought could have potentially been gone, period, after what happened at Georgia Tech. And then you've got a guy in Ted Monachino who, is once again a position coach after last year having to serve as an analyst, but still seems motivated despite being a guy that was in the NFL and has plenty of experience there, but also has great experience at the college level. He seems like he's motivated despite being an older coach. And so I think that the combination of those guys, like we thought could possibly happen, is showing up so far. And there's a credit to the players as well. I think Ritzie is really just taken things to another level. He's turned it up a gear. I think one of the things that you've seen from Travis Shaw is the weight loss has really helped him. He's down to 303 after coming into Carolina above 340. And, part of that was because he came out of high school having had a shoulder surgery and everything like that. But he's really done a good job of getting himself in shape, and it's paying dividends for Carolina. And when we say the defensive front six, we're also talking about the linebackers. Power Echols, taking over the communication, setting everything up defensively. He's done a great job with that. And we were wondering with Amari Campbell, struggled with some missed tackles in that bowl game against West Virginia. Would he be able to grow into a guy that could be trusted at linebacker, especially when he then bangs up his hand, ends up breaking it and has to wear a club on it for the first however many games of the season. So far, he's 2 games in, he's had the club on, and he's looked great. He's done a great job not only of stopping the run, but being a force when it's come to throwing him in there occasionally as a blitzer. He's got 2 sacks already so far this season. So this group as a whole, they're doing what they need to do. And that's why I want the secondary to step up, because the guys in front of you are finally doing what you need them to do. I shouldn't say finally, because the linebackers have been doing what they've needed to do ever since Cedric Gray took over the starting job from a struggling Eugene Asante. But yeah, I think now, if this secondary can get itself ironed out, this Tar Heel defense has a legitimate chance to be not only average, but maybe even slightly above average, which is what we have been desperately asking for years. So you head to the keys to the game for Carolina. The first one for me is to run the football, run it right at him, because this is a North Carolina Central team that has struggled to stop the run games of Alabama State and Elon. If they can't stop those run games with what you're bringing to the table, what we've seen from Amari and Hampton, even if he doesn't go, what we saw a week ago from Davian Gauss, And then the combination possibly of Darwin Barlow, who I really hope is able to get out there while he's, dealing with some sort of lower body injury of his own, just so he can prove to people what kind of value he brings to this team. And then Caleb Hood. It doesn't matter what this group looks like. They need to run the football and continue to exploit that weakness that NC Central has.
Yeah, I said it earlier in the program. I expect 35 to 40 runs tomorrow at a minimum. I know we want to see progress in the passing game. That progress might need to wait because the best way for Carolina to win this game and probably win this game and get out of here healthy is to run the ball right down them because it shortens the game. And they've shown an inability to stop the run through the first two games, and so I think you will see that. I've said it for the last year and a half. This offense is built to run the football. When it's running, that's when this offense is at its best. I think you'll see that with how deep and talented this running back room really is, and so expect to see a heavy dose of the running game. If I was Carolina, I would not run Connor Harrell as much in this game, just because I don't think you need it. But I expect to see the ball on the ground early and often tomorrow because there's no reason why Carolina should not be able to run up what will be the most formidable front they've seen so far this season.
Second key to the game is limit explosives. One of the easiest ways to keep opponents like this in the game, and we saw it a week ago with Charlotte, is to allow the big plays down the field. And really, it's only in the passing game. Communication is going to be huge, but also you just need to see guys like Marcus Allen and Caleb Koss be more consistent in coverage. If they can do that in this game, I find it hard to believe that an NC Central team who is struggling throwing the football coming into the game will be able to stick around with Carolina.
Yeah, and look, I don't think they've got the athletes that Charlotte had, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. And I think the thing about it, you mentioned the new attitude around this defense. Make no mistake, Jeff Collins was not happy about the big plays they allowed last week.
Yep.
That got communicated. And probably in a not so nice manner, just knowing his attitude and the way he goes about things. And so I think this group is going to be eager to respond. I think really if they shore up the communication, they finish, and then they tackle well. I don't think you'll see these plays happen quite as often. And so look, I wasn't as concerned about it last week. They do this week, then I'll be on here screaming with you on Monday night whenever we recap this game. So I think you'll see a motivated defense that, yes, has performed well the first 2 weeks in terms of points, want to show up and really be a defense that imposes its will against its opponent. I don't think you'll see the big plays happening tomorrow afternoon against Carolina's defense.
Yeah, that's one way to keep teams in games. The other way, and this is our third key to the game, is discipline. You've got to be disciplined in this game because penalties are an easy way to allow an FCS opponent to hang around. Carolina last week, 8 penalties, 67 yards. After doing a really good job in the first game, just 3 penalties for 45. Back at home to take 8 penalties, not what you want to see. So for a group that Mack Brown said we were focusing in the offseason and they were even giving out punishments to guys for taking penalties, this group has to find a way to get back to what they did in week 1 and remain disciplined, because if they don't, it'll give NC Central the chance to keep themselves in this game.
To me, it's not even about keeping the opponent in the game as it is more about just if you come out here and you take a lot of penalties, it's like this is all about creating habits and building habits. And you look at Carolina's struggles the last couple of years in this department, it's because in September they were committing penalties in games that they had no business to. We talk about it, all the time in basketball, where October and November, December, you're building habits for conference play. The same thing happens in football, where you're really forming out and you're really forming your identity and setting the tone for the type of team you're going to be in conference play. You come out here and you commit 8 penalties, then I'm going to be more liable to believe that in conference play, you're going to be a team that commits 6, 7, 8 penalties a night. You come out here and commit 3 or 4, then maybe last week was a blip on the radar. You had an officiating crew that called the game tighter, this, that, or whatever. So then that to me is the message. It's not. I don't worry about Carolina committing penalties and keeping the opponent in the game. I worry about them committing penalties, falling back into bad habits that cost us games later down the season that matter more. So, and again, the bench is a motivator. You commit a stupid penalty, put them on the bench, take them out for a drive. That's the best way to motivate guys, is to not play them. And I think you'll see a much more focused team on the field tomorrow night.
Yeah, and to credit them, in years past, we've heard them say that they were going to do that. And again, I said it after the first game. They did that in the first game. Guys that committed penalties were off the field. They did the same thing again the other day. It's just, guys have to realize you're 100% right. It's not only the habits that you form, let's say, in the passing game or some of the things that you do defensively. No, it involves what you do in all aspects of the game. So when it comes to discipline, you have to be a disciplined team early in the season, because if you're not, it's easy to fall into those habits of committing the same types of penalties over and over again. I think this is a game where there should be no question that this group comes out, puts together a clean game, and finds a way to win pretty significantly, but more importantly, just get themselves in some sort of a rhythm when it comes to staying disciplined for the remainder of the season. All right, we head to our predictions. What do you think happens tomorrow, 6 o'clock for Carolina when they take on NC Central?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I think Carolina wins, and I think they win going away. I know they're going to run the ball, which might take away the possessions, but I think you'll have some more home runs, and I think you'll have a little bit more explosive plays from Carolina. I think the Heels win this game 42-10 to improve to 3-0 for the third straight season.
Boy, I thought it would probably be even more confident with some of the explosive plays that you saw coming. For me, I don't think there's anything really to worry too much about in this game in terms of defense. Maybe the secondary gives up a big play or two to Joaquin Davis, but I can't see it being as bad as last week. I think that front six is going to continue to dominate, maybe even more than any game they have so far this season against an FCS opponent. I think Connor Harrell probably takes another step this week. I think you're going to see some of those missed throws cleaned up this week, because the more reps that he gets in there, you could say, well, he's had reps in practice. Yeah, he had reps in practice in the offseason. But again, you got to remember, he was battling Max Johnson. There were times where he just wasn't able to establish a rhythm because they were switching him in and out of the first and second group. Now that he's been with this first group for 2 consecutive weeks now, he's played a game with this group. I think you're only going to see him continue to get better. And I think maybe one of those guys emerges in that receiving core. I don't care who it is. The guy that I would look at probably with the best chance to do it is Kobe Paysour, because we've seen him do it before. But to me, it doesn't really matter. I think someone will emerge there, though, that we'll be counting on moving forward for the rest of the season. I think Carolina, they'll probably run it a pretty decent amount, and I think they need to do that especially early. But I get it if you want to try to see what Connor Harrell has and continue to establish some of that chemistry with his receivers. I think Carolina hits some big plays, like you were saying, couple in the run. I think there will be a few in the pass game as well. And I think Carolina wins this game. I'll go a little bit more high scoring for Carolina. I think they take it 56-7 over North Carolina Central. Regardless of what happens in this game tomorrow night, we will have you covered. Now, since it's a 6 o'clock game, even last week, it got too late. We're going to put up the recap on Sunday morning for you guys. It'll allow me a little bit more time to be able to, after the game is over, type everything out and really get the 5 or so takeaways that I have from the game written up in the fashion that you guys deserve, instead of having to rush it up just so that it can get up before 10 o'clock or whatever, so that you guys can read it before you go to sleep. So that'll be on Sunday, and then again, as we go throughout the week, look for the stock report, and then of course we'll have everything for you when it comes to that James Madison game starting next week. Very similar to what we did this week, where I'll put the article up probably earlier in the day on Friday, but that's the hope moving forward for the rest of the season. In the meantime, any updates with injuries in between there or any other storylines coming out about Tar Heel football, we will, of course, have you covered. Same thing when it comes to recruiting, the edition of the podcast that we were wanting to do this week. Unfortunately, couldn't get that scheduled for this week. So we're going to do that early next week. Should be probably Tuesday night is what I'm looking at right now with Zach, where we will break down the commitments of 4-star edge rusher Xavier Griffin Haynes, as well as Carolina's commitment out of the state of Florida in that 2026 class, cornerback Danny Odom. So make sure you keep an eye out for all of that. If you want to read about those two guys, go back, check out their commitment articles on the website. And if any other news comes out on that 2026 class, and there are some guys Carolina is still going after in the 2025 class, we will also have all that information for you on there as well. The basketball side of things, boy, a lot of news coming out about what they're going to be doing in the preseason. A couple of matchups, one with Memphis that will be the Tar Heels' official scrimmage. Find out information about that. And then also the blue and white scrimmage that Carolina normally does, that is being moved. So means probably no more late night activities, live action with Hubert Davis. That seems to be, moving. I don't know if they're still going to call it live action or what they're actually going to call it, but it will now be moved to a new location. So make sure you go and check out where it will be moved to, the date that it will be happening. Josh has all of that stuff for you guys on the website. And of course, with practice getting ready to get underway, Josh will have you covered with all of that stuff as well if there are any news and notes that comes out from the basketball program. So that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Make sure you head over and check out the preview edition of the article for any of the latest stuff leading up until game time. Each of the last 2 weeks, we've had injuries that have come down. So make sure if you're wondering about the latest news on the Tar Heels, especially with that injury report, check that article right before the game for all of the latest when it comes to the Tar Heels injury report and everything like that. But yeah, that wraps it up for tonight. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.